And we'll see if we just can't get this slideshow started right from the beginning. So y'all can see that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So the very first thing I wanted to tell you about today was a book I got in the mail last night, and I read for half the night. I admit it. It's brand new. It's called A Beginner's Guide to America for the Immigrant and the Curious, actually. And by Hakakian, brand new this month. She's very witty. She's very informative. She was an immigrant, been around for about 30 years. It's really easy reading from someone else's perspective, but you have all heard me talk about guides to other countries. This is one of those, only it's to the United States, and it's quite good. And another one I wanted to call your attention to today is a new one that is appearing in our library, The Wyoming Blizzard of 1949, Surviving the Storm. And that one is 2018. I just hadn't seen it before, but it's new in our library now. Okay, so before Social Security, what kind of assistance was nearly always available? You know, we as human beings have always had to help one another out to make sure that we would survive during apocalyptic times, during other times, or whatever. So what did families have available to them? And who didn't have those things available? And how do we take care of assistance issues today? Because we have a myriad of them. And I have people say, well, we're the first ones who ever did it, and we should do it or we shouldn't do it. And I'm here to tell you, it's been around since time immemorial. So families have always had to depend on themselves. For instance, I'm just going to take you back to merry old England. And beginning by the 16th and 17th century, it's official at that point. Each county took care of its own poor. That's why their birth records were so important, because they recorded which county would be ultimately responsible if a person fell on hard times. Say that a woman was born in Dorset, moved over to another county and got married there. The marriage fell on hard times. Her husband died. Which county would be responsible for her? Well, it would be the original county. And so they were very, very careful and very explicit in England and throughout all of those royal colonies to note which agency would be responsible in some way to take care of them, whether they went to the poorhouses, they got taken care of in some other way, taken back in by their family back in that original town or county. There's going to be records, and that's very cool. You're going to be surprised to find the records you find. I was surprised in Norway. Come on in, Kathy. In Norway, those owners of larger farms were responsible for taking care of the poor, and the duty could be passed around from year to year. Generally, you'd see kind of an April time in which people traded where they were going to be actually being employed on a farm. And also, many times you can see that suddenly the owner of a larger farm there became responsible for maybe someone who'd been originally born on that farm or someone who got passed around from another farm from another year. So there are records. The neat thing is in Norway, those records are right back in those Lutheran records, and you can find them rather easily. You can also find them there by looking at the coming ins and the going outs, those kinds of records that are also there in the Lutheran records, at least until 2015, when the state took over those records. So my short story is that lots of countries, not just these countries, but I've confined myself to these today, took care of people when they fell on hard times. It might not be the super best care. It was very, very seldom that they had to beg, unless they were gypsies, or maybe other people who itinerantly had fallen out with family. So there was always some kind of process. Okay, in New England, there were these things called warnings outs. In Gloucester, for instance, you'll find warnings out right out online. It'll tell you who was warned out of their particular city from 1705 through 1834. So, what's a warning out? It's a neat way, first of all, to find your family if they were moving from one town to the next and they had not been part of the original New England charter for that town for the freemen. Warnings out permitted a local authority to issue a warrant requiring newcomers to leave town. You see, towns were responsible for all of their inhabitants, and that meant even if they fell on hard times. So, if a person moved into a town, they could not qualify as a desirable member of the town, or they could not show personal means of support. They could be warned out by a warrant from the town constable. And that old town constable really gets into the process in Vermont, where they discover how they can make a lot of money by warning people out. They could be warned out by warrant. It didn't mean that necessarily they had to leave. It just meant that no matter what, if they were in miserable condition, the town was not, they were not going to take care of them. And it was meant to make towns solvent so they could take care of themselves. Remember that those early New England towns were settled by people who agreed to formulate that town, or that outstretch from one town to another thing that they were beginning to settle, another place. But those were formal agreements by people who said, we're freemen, we have money, not a lot, but we have enough, and we have land granted to us in these places, and we agree with one another that we will take care of one another. So say if somebody moved in who was a relative to someone, they might be warned out immediately, even though they would not necessarily have to leave. For instance, in those Gloucester warnings out, you're going to see that you will be able to find these things in various places. First of all, the town records early on. In the 16th into the 1700s, you're going to find it there. But you might find them in selectmen record books. You might find them in a record of personal property, or in original warrants that, for instance, Gloucester filed. There's going to be also within those records in New England, sometimes you're going to find a CI. That is, they recorded someone coming in, a CIT, they came into a town, or a TI, they were taken in, and a bond was given by a resident saying, okay, my Aunt Mabel came, she has nobody else to take care of her, and I am guaranteeing a bond so that she can be here. You're also going to find the name of the constable who warned people in and out. And sometimes those might be relations of yours. It can be kind of fun to see what's going on. You're going to find them in town records, in the New England Historical and Genealogical Society books. And that means that many times those things that are in the society books have also been placed out online at their at American Ancestors, their on-site location for the records they have online. So it makes it a pretty neat thing to be able to have someone, at least in your society, have a membership to that so you can check it out. Newspapers are some of the best ones today to begin to find these warnings out because they're sometimes humorous. Clerk records, church records, because remember, in that first century and a half, let's just say up through the 5th to the 6th generation, for Massachusetts, for Vermont, for the area of New Hampshire, Connecticut, and so on, the town records were the church records and vice versa. So you can find a great deal by looking at those things. You'll find out a lot from the town meeting, the official town meeting each year. There have always been laws governing help for the poor, the indigent, and the orphaned. They might not be the desirable things we would want, especially for orphans. God love them. And they might not be the things that we would think of today. Remember always that this has always been a work in progress. Uh, so you're going to have to see territorial laws. If you look at the territorial law for Montana for 1864, it talks about what they were going to do immediately regarding uh, monies from people, poll taxes to be able to take care of the poor and the indigent. So you'll want to see those. Um, and no, I've had people say, aren't poll taxes, don't they refer to elections? Not in this instance, they don't. You're going to want to see state laws virtually across the United States mandating different kinds of taxes to take care of the poor. And later on, by about 1905, you'll see a thing called the county poor tax. It kind of defers to that, and you'll see the state law changing at that point. Now, when I talk about this, I'm talking about state laws mainly in the North. There are some very different things that happened in the South. There were things where people weren't taken care of at all. The South is about equally split. I don't have a split for you on the particular states. Some of them did mandate ways of taking care of poor. Some of them had the county poor farm or various ways to take care of things, or again, just taking people onward to the edge of the county and urging them to go elsewhere. Search terms. If you're out there and you want to look with your family, you can combine your particular surname with a thing like quotation marks, mother's pension in Montana, Wyoming, found it in Minnesota, Idaho's slightly different in terms of it. You can put in poor tax, you can put in indigent, dependent women, dependent children, orphans, poor farms. And or you can get into, I would advise you to see what
Hello?
the actual search term was. I would advise you to look at the
Hello.
newspaper for a particular area and try to find the county commissioner records to see in at least a 1 month's report how they were reporting out the indigent, the poor, and so on. When I look at the number of different uh, poor tax guides that, for instance, Cascade County had, then I go look at Lewis and Clark County, and they refine it quite a bit because they were a county before Cascade County was. It's very interesting to see all the search terms you can use. Watch for some changes after prohibition becomes law in 1919. Remember, Montana went into prohibition 1 year early before it became a lockdown across the United States. Because it's not surprising. I checked Lewis and Clark County, and they're having the same problems there that Cascade County had. That is, suddenly they don't have a tax base. They had all those bars. In Great Falls, there were over 60 of them in 1919, and suddenly they are shuttered. And no money is coming in. So the city of Great Falls, the city of Helena, they are not getting their city license taxes for those businesses right at the beginning of 1919 with no prospect of them coming in. The buildings are shuttered. In many cases, they're for sale. And so there are some big surprises because the tax base has been immediately eroded. The breweries closed. Well, officially they did. Let me tell you, in both Lewis and Clark County and in Cascade County, it was unofficial at that point. It truly was. So the county commission records, the official minutes are pure gold for both of these counties. I also checked Teton County. They're listed. I just didn't go any further than that, but I'm confident that if you find the newspaper that was the official newspaper for notices for the county commissioners, you are going to find the reports of the minutes. In Great Falls, that's really important for you because guess what? The official minutes for Cascade County are not indexed until 1906. And so before that, you have to look. If you're looking for materials before 1906, you're on your own in terms of looking at what the categories would be, even that had been indexed by the county. You need to look at the records kept by the county attorney because they were absolutely pivotal in terms of who those dependent women and dependent children would be. They were pivotal in orphan records and in the poor farms. The commission just made sure that the money finally got to the appropriate people. But the county attorney's office did an awful lot of the heavy carrying. And there will be, in many cases, you are going to find the application process. It's been saved. In Vermont, let me turn to this. In Vermont, I wanted to go back to those warnings out. In Vermont, 1779, just a couple of years after their statehood, they passed a law, or their territorialhood, they passed a law to prevent those not property owners from becoming a drain on the town. But their rules were pretty tricky, according to Mark Bushnell, who has written a couple of neat books. His books are Hidden History of Vermont, and It Happened in Vermont. He has a thing called Vermont Diggers Daily News that you can look at if you put that in Google. Vermont Diggers Daily News. And he tells some pretty hilarious stories. If you had property, for instance, worth $100 when you came, or you had rented a place in the town for 2 years, or you'd paid taxes there for 2 years, or if you came right into town and said, hey, nobody wants to take the mayor's position, I'll do it for a year, guess what? You couldn't be kicked out. So they jimmied with the rules quite a bit. The Vermont state itself abandoned that law in 1801 because they just said there's too many exceptions. So they left it to town selectmen to figure out who would be out and who would be in. And the selectmen took it so seriously that in some cases they outrageously warned out most anyone. And a new selectman for the next year could mean a change in rules. And that's when the constables took advantage of it because they said, well, hey, if you're going to volunteer to be a constable, you may have to put up a bond to be a constable, but you should be able to earn a fee for each warning out. So that meant, for example, that transients could not get any such aid. They just were taken to the edge of the town, just like they were in the West, and told to move along right away. And if they didn't move along, they got put in jail for a day or two, and then they were moved along. Some places in Vermont could withhold help from any newcomer who was not of a quiet and peaceable behavior, or who, in the selectman's opinion or the constable's opinion, was likely to be chargeable. That is, they were likely to become a financial burden. So they just hurried them out and told them, you're ineligible. We're not messing with you. In 1779, to tell you how unimaginable this was, it kind of reads like a redneck express with regard to warnings out in the county of Windsor, South Windsor, North Windsor, whatever. In 1779, on New Year's Eve, apparently there was a party, pretty good sized party. And as a result, the constable didn't care who you were or what the rules were. He warned out 18 of the town's actual residents on New Year's Eve. Now, those warnings usually gave people 30 days to leave, but it wasn't enforced. So, I mean, it was without enforcement. It caused a lot of problems, actually, with people being by nature and by times, some of them were very amused by it until they got charged by the new constable, and then it wasn't too much fun anymore. Anyway, let's talk about briefly, as this fella does, let's talk about the case of Amos Currier, not of Currier and Ives. I thought it might be, but no. He was one of those in Windsor. He was a resident and he got warned out in 1779. Nobody enforced that. He was still living in town 25 years later, causing a few problems for the town. So the Windsor selectmen decided they'd had enough of Courier in 1804. So Samuel Russell, the town constable, went with him south. He was in custody of Samuel Russell, and they took him to Haverhill, Massachusetts, where he had previously lived 25 to 30 years before that. Well, what happened was Windsor, the selectmen, got a really surprising letter in return from Haverhill's overseers of the poor saying they wanted no part of Courier. The letter said, "The pauper you have endeavored to throw upon us, we now return to you, and hope he may reach you in as good a condition as he left. The person who brought him in is in custody, however, and as he cannot get bail, he must be committed to the prison to answer the law of our state." So Haverhill replied by taking the constable, the town constable for Windsor, throwing him in jail. It says he didn't last very long. The note elsewhere in that same letter reported he'd been released because he'd somehow scraped together $14.25 for bail. Now, when you have time later today, or if you do, go to one of those machines I gave you 2 weeks ago, one of those addresses, so that you can see what 1425 equals today. It's quite a bunch of money that he was able to scrape together. Needless to say, towns had it in for one another. And so you're going to be able to find a lot of warnings out. I've given you a list today of warnings out, different books that you can find. In our library, we have a couple available right now. Robert Love's Warnings, Searching for Strangers in Colonial Boston, those who were warned out of Boston. I mean, Boston was a much bigger place, but early on, it was warning out people that it said, we don't think we can do it. And so you're also going to see, by the way, in Boston, you will see total religions warned out. Quakers, yeah. The thing is that the records are there, and they're pretty neat records. So they provide another source of material for you if you have people with that background. A couple of other things. There are some books for the index to Plymouth County, Massachusetts, warning out from the Plymouth Court records that are available. The Plymouth, Massachusetts warning outs right in the Mayflower Descendant. So if you have that Mayflower Descendant in your library, you're going to be able to find those in volumes 46 through 50. Unwelcome Americans Living on the Margin in Early New England is another one. It goes pretty much across New England. There is a New Hampshire warnings out, early to 1800 approximately. So you'll find these kind of conditions being set pretty early on. It's of course totally different from a time when we had homesteads and people came in singly. But when you're looking at warnings out, I would remind you again of your neighbors and your people who are close to you, because you're going to find out that they got warned out together. So it's another way for you to look at who was being warned out and were they part of a group as a whole. County records for you beginning about 1840, 1830 are gold. The potential records include, in most states, although not a lot of people got the material, mother's pensions. You're going to find those monthly being paid out. What's really neat is when you see the mother pensions, there's also another whole file by the county attorney as to the way in which they were checked out to see if they were fit moms. I don't mean moms that had fits. I mean, there was somebody there judging whether or not they were fit to even being taking care of their kids. And if they weren't, there were whole other issues going on. You're going to see which physician got the contract to take care of the county poor. Yes, right up to the time of Social Security in most states, you're going to find out that a physician took a contract and actually took care of the county poor. You're going to find county poor farm records, which are different from other records. You'll see a burial of the county poor. It's a contract with a payout recorded to either a particular contractor or a mortuary uh, or a particular person each month. By the way, all of these people who were getting paid had to submit a bond so that they didn't take care of the county, and then they had to follow up with their records each month. So it's a gold mine. They named these people. The poor fund expenditures to contractors and store owners are in every set of the county minutes in Montana. You will find out who gave something or who provided something for the county poor farm, for example. You're also going to see who had already paid their poor taxes. That $2 a year in about 1900, maybe sometimes people paid and then their bosses paid again because it was easier than having people be able to be approached while they were at work. And people are listed with their refunds for the proof of the poor tax they'd overpaid. You're also going to see whose land got and whose property got seized. And by the way, that usually occurred if you hadn't paid your taxes early on, about 1896 in Cascade County, then your land was for sale at a sheriff's sale by the end of April. I'm just showing you one that I found from the Great Falls Tribune, 8 April 1901. The people in Great Falls said, well, the county, it's a county poor tax. Why do we have to pay it? And so they always had to reassure people that no matter what, the city was part of the county and that residents of the city were liable for that tax just like everyone else was. And people challenged it pretty well every year. You'll see another example that I've put for you. You'll see what these things look like in the newspaper. This is 1899. The board received verbal bids from local physicians for the care of the county poor for the ensuing year. And Dr. Gowan Ferguson submitted $525 as what he would charge for the year to take care of that. He had to put up a bond of $1,500, and he got the bid for that particular year. The board received the following bids for the burial of the county poor for the year beginning December 16, 1899. George Berthold, this is one of our very first morticians in Great Falls, said he would charge $17.25 for each interment. Jay McAllister said he'd charge $18. That was the two. So guess who got it? George Berthold did. And later on, he sells, by the way, and I believe it becomes, I better not speculate on that. The board awarded Berthold, subject to his furnishing a bond in the sum of $500. And then Stephen Spitzley was given back some money because he'd paid too much. So you can see just all kinds of things in this process. The poor fund. My goodness, what would be the poor fund? Poor fund. Well, it might include a refund of a poor tax. So you want to look at that because it has the refunds in there. These change slightly from meeting to meeting because the reporter got to put the stuff down, even if he took or she took the information from the county records. There'll be things like Anaconda Mining Company, coal for the outside poor, meaning maybe it's the county poorhouse or it's people who live in outlying communities who need access to coal and they're allotted so much through the poor fund. So you'll see lights new for the poor farm down here from the Boston and Great Falls Electric Light and Power Company in the amount of $11. You'll see Richard Berry getting paid for the poor farm coal that he's taken out there, $29.48. So you're going to see if your person was a merchant, you're going to see your person in a different way. So there's lots and lots of records. Here's one from Wilmington, Delaware, where somebody did not pay their county and poor tax, which was lawfully assessed in 1898, 99, 1900, 1901, $27.30 being charged, and they've seized and taken the property of Michael McMullen and sold it. So it was a serious thing. Over a period of time, you could lose quite a bit. The Great Northern Railroad men in Montana generally registered quite a kick in July because their checks were shorted $2 because the county had a special poor tax, and the employer, according to the law, had to collect this tax every year from each one of their employees as they're held responsible for it. And the person only had to be an employee for 30 days. Here's an old soldier in 1910, Henry Hall in Great Falls. He'd been a resident for 16 years. He'd been kind of a thorn in the side of the poor farm and various people. He'd spent most of his time either in the hospital or out at the county poor farm. He was a vet of the Civil War, received a monthly pension, but he squandered that on liquor, it says. Has no relatives. County Auditor Dennis had been looking for a permanent home, and he said, aha, I found it. And they sent him out of Great Falls down to Santa Monica, California, where he's going to reside for the rest of his natural life in the U.S. Soldiers' Home at that place. Apparently, they would take him. So what else interferes here? Prohibition, of course. No taxes were collected, no county flow-through taxes on saloons. The counties were immediately in trouble. You're going to see this in every other state. Everyone had money problems because they had been counting on those particular taxes, sometimes collected twice a year, in terms of the saloons and the Gertie houses and the particular places where there were breweries. And each town usually had some kind of a brewery, whether it was formal or informal. It got quite frustrating in Montana. Here's a headline I found on May 22, 1910 in the Tribune. Somebody saying that, they've convened a national conference of charities and corrections to discuss the status of dependent women, because there were more of them each month. They were getting divorced. Men were leaving town, not available to be paying. They said, well, it's simple. Our solution is that all those widows should wed. Or you could see in Great Falls right away on the second day of the particular situation, that by then a man by the name of Stippich had been taken along with his beer bottles for bootlegging. We're just right into the second day of it, and people were saying, well, maybe I can sell beer that's less than 2%. So they tried that in Helena, and they tried that in Bozeman, and they tried that in Great Falls, in Missoula, and so on. And you'll see lots of stories and the things happening. On that very same day in 1919, you'll see John Denham, who was the proprietor of the Old Home Bar, said, I'm going to reopen at noon today with non-intoxicating beverages containing less than 2%. Yeah, he was one of those. He got closed down within the first month, and the rules were made very clear that 2% was 2%. Doctors at that point were still saying, come to me. You can get a prescription to go to the drugstore to get your alcohol. Many things were happening. So through all of those years, those more than a decade of time with prohibition, I can tell you that if you look at the newspapers, you're going to find all kinds of people who found a lot of ways around the law. Probably once we got rid of prohibition, the toughest thing for the state of Montana, which had charge at that point and still does today of liquor and alcohol, was getting the very, very small bars, the home bars in people's houses, closed down. They persisted in some cases up through the 1940s. And you're going to find some stories in the newspaper about them. Then comes the Depression, where people have nothing. And people are to the point where our county records continue to record the downward slide of people for non-payment of taxes. The property and assets were seized. So you're going to see sheriff's sales frequently. And behind every one of those sheriff sale ads, you can go to the county records and you will find a court action that is more than a couple of pages. So you're going to see some pretty interesting information. The same thing comes when you look at people, especially women and children, who had need for assistance. There were widows' pensions, and widows' pensions contain the mom's application, the investigation of her circumstances by a county officer, and her fitness, again, to be a mom. Boy, that's amazing. With a report back to the county before the process convenes and they get their widow's pensions. At that point, you're going to see the payment each month. You're also going to see, as we see in the Anaconda Standard in 1925, that their particular county commissioners were dealing with people who rented to the poor and for a certain sum of money, and what they got in return from the county, supplies to the poor there, not unusual. The mother's pensions and the dependent children required an application of some type through the courts. So throughout counties in the West, especially, you are going to see these applications and materials frequently today, because they have no need to keep these records, although they're supposed to keep some format of them permanently. You may see these at different kinds of historical associations, usually the county. Each county set of records is going to be different, but there will be records. And in our county, I know the mother pension applications are not brief. In the school census records, taking you back to where we were a couple of weeks ago, you're going to find the guardians who took care of the orphans and the indigent. And you sometimes then can look at two sets of documents, the school census record for the year or for however long that they had the particular person, and also the set of records from the county attorney or the county court, the county district court, pardon me, but you will find them. Religious organization records, like a lot of the Catholic societies like St. Thomas Orphans Home. The kids are informally recorded at certain times with their school activities, so you'll know who they are. But I would call your attention to those school census records when you're trying to find orphans, when you're trying to find out who took care of those kids whose parents had died, or the dad was gone and the mom had died, and they weren't sent yet to a state orphanage. You're going to find them in the county records, and they're very, very valuable to you. You're going to be able to construct that important thing called a timeline with it. Here's 1918. This is actually January 3, but the September records are finally being published. Remember, there's a time lag in these records. It took time to get them published, because when you had a county commission meeting, it wasn't a single day. It might go on for 5, 6, 7 days, and they would only deal with certain topics on certain days. So January 3 of 1919 shows the Monday, September 30th, 1918 records for the board, and it shows you all of the women at that point who were getting a mother's pension. That's right. They're listed month after month after month. So you're going to be able to find those. Pardon me, I'll go back again. You're going to see things like the Poor Fund, the Dependent Children. And here we don't know for this county if these were the actual kids or these were the moms who were being recorded who had dependent children. A way to tell that would be to look up a Mary Ryan, who's listed here for $25, and look to see what she has for her application, because she got so much per each child depending on their age, and nothing after the age of 14 usually. And the law changed a little from the session to session in the legislature. Or then you can look at the school census records and find out exactly who those kiddos were. You can look to see what all was out there at the poor farm. I apologize for the poor quality of this, but there was a salary for the cook out there, and she's named. There's somebody getting paid for the turkey gobblers they brought in there. The superintendent's salary is listed, $125 that particular month, and so on. Old age pensions in many states, those covered the people who didn't need to go to the county poor farm. They just needed some month-to-month assistance. All of Montana had this. All of Montana had these. And so they're a separate record-keeping process. We do have ours in Great Falls. And the neat thing is here is we also have their applications. It's an extensive application. It's 4 pages. There was an investigation of the applicant's family and their ability to support them. So sometimes you might find letters, or more frequently, you'll just find an affidavit saying they cannot take care of that particular person. The old age pensions needs only grew through the Prohibition time and through the time of Depression. It was a national need, and you're going to find this all over across the United States. Remember, if you applied and you needed money right away, you were not going to get that money once the application was, until even if it was filed, it might take a year. Read the records of the Sooners and the people who went out to California from Oklahoma and from the Depression and the Dust Bowl era areas, and you're going to see that it was on average about 1 year before they actually got money. So you're going to see the application coming up again and again and again. You're going to see rejected applications recorded in the minutes, investigations of fraud. And I've given you some search terms again that you can use. See the local newspaper columns, because you'll frequently see, for instance, out in the Augusta Times, I just saw people being taken to the county poor farm in Lewis and Clark County out of that area. You'll see old age pensions listed and what they were getting. Some people got $10, some got $12, some got $15, all based on their own individual needs. And by 1934, it's getting devastating. The state and the county poor tax relief for Montana will exceed $3 million that year. $3 million in terms of the dollars for 1934. So you can see it was a biggie. It was getting too big for states to handle, and they were beginning through various agencies and so on to ask for other kinds of help, because they realized that religious organizations couldn't take this on either. The crisis came and states and their counties were overwhelmed. Social Security was proposed and adopted by 1936. You're going to see county poor farms existing into the 50s and 60s still, with other kinds of aid. You'll still see, when you look at the county records after 1936, you're still going to see families listed in there, because Social Security, as it was originally proposed, did not take care of everything. Women's organizations, I investigated women's organizations in Washington, in Wyoming, and in Montana, just looking quickly at records, and they were responsible a great deal, especially for activities to take care of the poor around Christmas time, around Thanksgiving time, pivotal times during the year. Other people, of course, everybody attempted to take care of themselves through insurance clubs. I mean, Sons of Norway, that's how it started. I found a very interesting insurance club operated actually through the Eastern Orthodox Church and Catholic Church out in the Gulch area near Great Falls. And that one also names where the people came from in the old country. So that's really specific and really good. And by the way, those records exist in a book over at our History Museum. The Masons had a way to take care of one another, at least for burials. So you'll see a lot of different kinds of records. It's important for you to look at the organizations your family belonged to because they always had an ulterior motive. It wasn't just for the social relationship, although it was a lot of that. Well, what records exist? Of course, you're going to be able to see the Social Security application. I got so excited by these applications years ago before they were put out on Ancestry because I was just sure I was going to find my grandpa Oscar Lee's dad's name finally. Yeah, right. Got it. Had his mom's name in there, no problem. And in the place where it says father, it says not known. I warn you. Uh, but they are, the good news is they're available to you out at Ancestry, most all of them. And when I got mine originally, I had to pay $16 to get it out of NARA. So the Social Security record at retirement, take a look at that because you're going to find some names that people use. Maybe there are some marriages you didn't know about, or how people were reporting themselves out, or even if somebody used an alias, what they were using for an alias and still reporting under their name. It just depended on the year. It's going to tell you places they may have lived. Remember the Railroad Retirement Board records for those whose retirement was from a railroad, because that those people did not necessarily and most often did not get Social Security. In fact, let's bring this up. There's lots of people who are not eligible and do not get Social Security because they pay into a different system. I just recommend that if you have people who have worked for something like Bonneville Power Administration or one of the large dam associations in the South of the United States or whatever, these are federal civilian workers. Their records are different. Their federal retirements are different. They're not Social Security. You're going to need to go out and look at each one of these, but certain of these are also available. Let me tell you what's available early on before we get to privacy issues. In the 1900-1901 records for Congress, U.S. Congress of the United States, available out at a couple of places online for free, I found a relative I had been looking for. Now, I knew this person came from Iowa, came to Montana, worked in Missoula, and was one of the first stenographers for the U.S. Forest Service. You may not be aware of Missoula's part in helping to formulate and put together the true basis for the U.S. Forest Service. But there are fantastic records out in the U.S. House of Representatives showing what these people were paid. So I could find this great aunt, great aunt, pardon me, of me. I'd never met her. I still don't have a picture of her, but by golly, I can tell you what she got paid for the 2 years that she worked in Missoula for the U.S. Forest Service. I can tell you by looking at the newspaper record at that point when she moved to Boise because she got a better position with the U.S. Forest Service. And then I could look for that record again in NARA records and find them available, posted right out online. You'll see many other things there. Bonneville Power Administration has its own. A third of all federal civilian workers are ex-military. And again, they have a federal general schedule pay scale, so you can kind of see what they were working at. Many times early on, up to about 1925, you can find these things listed in those U.S. House and Senate records because they voted on paying those people out. So it's another way for you to be able to look at these things. The latest thing I can tell you is on April 9 of 2021, the U.S. Office of Personnel Management is putting together a federal workforce competency initiative to build a stronger workforce capability because they know how important those federal civilian workers are to the different quasi legal organizations that are there. And I use Bonneville Power Administration a great deal because in Montana, Washington, Idaho, for example, that's going to be a big place. And they employed thousands of people, and they still do. So that's my talk today. I guess I'm ending just about where I said I would. I will make sure that I have your emails, and when I go home this afternoon, I will email you the various records. And Mary, I will also email to you the particular 2-pager that I have on the first Social Security records, because literally, when you look at those first Social Security records, they look eerily the same as Montana's early records for those who were very poor. So I'm going to get back to the stop share,